in the misunderstoodness of the joint, in the mysteriousness of the joint, is the fact that SI joint pain or SI joint dysfunction is so common on people, but yet the solutions aren't that clear. And also the assessments aren't that clear. And this is probably the number one pushback from the evidence-based practice trolls I get on the interwebs are on my content when I talk about this test. But one of the tests that I use and I teach within the LTAP in the results cheat code is the March test, also called Gillet's test or Gillet's, depending on how you pronounce it. Gillett, or maybe one T. Don't know. I'm not the greatest speller in the world. I think if you're in the world of physical therapy or athletic training, you probably have heard people shit on this test because once upon a time, I think even as far back in the 80s or 90s, I'm not sure, I'd have to double check the article. But there was an article that basically said or showed that this was not a reliable or valid test. So a lot of times when I say that I use this as a test to sort of I describe this test as a traffic cop. This test, as well as the other SI joint mobility test, sort of is like directing us to like, is there a protection pattern at the viscera or central nervous system, or is it perhaps in the peripheral nervous system or the musculoskeletal system itself, which may include the joint itself. I don't want to discount that sometimes the joint mobility of the SI joint is because of the SI joint, but that's very, very few times that is. So this test gets a bad rap because a couple articles saying that it was unreliable. If you actually read the studies, both that was presenting it, but then also prove that it was unreliable, they don't actually use that many subjects, number one. And number two, they test them with a certain amount of time in between. To me, this actually supports what I see clinically and how I use the test is that SI joint hypomobility, which is commonly referred to as SI joint dysfunction, is not so black and white. It's not always a structural hypomobility or just something that is joint related. SI joint hypomobility, 75 to 80% of the time, is actually a strategic hypomobility. What does strategic hypomobility mean? It means that the body, the brain, the nervous system basically, is choosing to limit mobility around the joint for a reason. You can do movement or you can do manual therapy, and the outcomes may be that it gets the SI joint to move, and it may be that it doesn't. And so this is why inherently I think the assessment is so not reliable. Well, one of the reasons why it's not reliable, because we're looking at a joint that is heavily influenced by a lot of other factors. So it makes sense when you're doing a reliability study, especially when you're looking at the same joint at a different time, that you're going to get different results. Because let's say, theoretically, let's say the person in that study, they were tested in the morning and then they're supposed to come back 4 hours later to get tested again. I think they did it a certain amount of hours later and then they did it days later. So either scenario, hours later or days later, we might present to something completely different. I see this in my athletes all the time. And what happens is like maybe they go to lunch and eat a food that their gut doesn't tolerate very well. Then their gut goes into this protective pattern around the visceral organ and it changes the mobility, right? That protective pattern is expressed in the SI joint, one of them or both of them. And so literally 4 hours later, this person could have a different mobility experience in their joints, especially 4 days later. Anything can happen, right? So inherently, joints like that are very much correlated to being witnesses for the viscera and for the nervous system. It's hard to sort of nail down a true mobility test of their structure.